To go.
Cool. Great. All right. I'll take it away. Okay. So I'll introduce the team, and Hamish and Heath, you're able to make your way up to the table as well, because you may need to answer questions, I suspect. So we have Hamish Nicholson, who's just walking up now. He's the project director for this project, has been since February. And Heath George, who is our commercial director. He's led the development of the business case, working closely with Crown Infrastructure Partners on our funding arrangements. Nathan is sitting to the left of Heath. Nathan Biddle is a director at EY, and EY has done a lot of the great work behind the economic case that is being presented in the business case. And Chris French, who is known to you all, is our technical director and has been involved in this project since its inception a few years ago.
Siobhan, can I also just mention that we've got Sean Wynn, Deputy Chief Executive from Crown Infrastructure Partners, on the call as well.
Good morning, Mayor and councillors. Great to be with you and look forward to meeting you in person.
Thanks, Sean. Can we have the presentation up, please, Letitia? Great, thank you. And just on the first slide, so just to provide a bit of strategic context and refresh your memories, sewage sludge is a natural and unavoidable outcome of the current wastewater treatment process. And we produce a lot of it in Wellington, so around 15,000 tonnes a year, which is over 40 tonnes a day. We currently pipe it along a 9-kilometre pipeline from a Point Southern landfill, where we are required to mix it with rubbish to meet the conditions of our consent. So it's 4 parts rubbish, 1 part sludge. And a condition of our current landfill consent is to investigate alternatives for the treatment of sludge. And that's what really precipitated this project to be initiated initially by Wellington Water around 2 to 3 years ago. Our current landfill consent expires in 2026. And as you're all aware, we need to find an alternative disposal method for sludge. This council has committed to reducing waste by a third by 2026, and finding an alternative to the way we dispose of sludge is central to fulfilling that aspiration. And just to quote from the LTP, where we signalled that dealing with sludge is essential to allowing us collectively to reduce waste to landfill and significantly reduce the scale of the pending landfill extension. I'm trying to see, are we on the project investment objective slide? So with any project, we start with problem statements and then come up with some investment objectives. And those investment objectives are used as a primary means to compare all of the options that could solve the problem. So the investment objectives, which we showed you back in November when we presented the initial case for change, are the same. So that by 2026, we'll minimise the amount of sludge sent to the southern landfill. Will enhance the resilience of the sludge management, will reduce the environmental impact of sludge management, and will align our sludge management practices to Mana Whenua values and principles. So those have remained unchanged through pretty much the course of the project. Next slide, please, Letitia. I'm sorry, I can't actually see where we're at with the slides, so I'm just now on slide 3, which is purpose and contents.
It would be great if we could see the slides.
Yeah, we don't. For those of us on Zoom, it's not screen sharing, so we can't actually see the slides on Zoom. So
hang on, we'll maybe just take a pause until we can do that.
That would be awesome.
I understand that the slides have been emailed to us. Yes, at 10:17.
It's interesting. It didn't come through for me. Oh yeah, and Beth just sent her one through. So I just.
That's working for us now. Thanks, Letitia.
Good.
Thanks, Letitia. Okay, so the purpose of today, we will provide you an update on what we've been doing with the project and the progress since we last came to you with this. Provide a briefing. The primary purpose is to provide an overview of the final business case that will be coming to you at the council meeting next week for approval. And Chris is also going to weave in some of the lessons that he's learned from a recent study tour he did of USA facilities, similar sludge facilities. So I'll hand over to Chris, who will take you through the bulk of this presentation. Other members of the team will pipe in when required, but if we could get to the end and then have questions in, that would be great. Okay, so I'll hand over to you, Chris.
Perfect, thanks, Siobhan. So just an update on recent Projectivities. So as Siobhan outlined, we've been developing a business case that is more aligned to Treasury's Better Business Case model, and we've had EY helping us with the cost-benefit analysis and economics around that. The business case has confirmed that the preferred option is thermal hydrolysis, digestion and thermal drying, and that plant should be located at Moa Point. And I'll go into the reasons why as part of this presentation. We've been doing a lot of analysis behind the scenes on the funding model, and we'll cover that off in the presentation too. We'll be coming back to the council in August for final confirmation of the funding model. That's not part of the decision next week. Resource consents and a notice of requirement documentation have been prepared. They are in final draft at the moment and going through review, and they'll be lodged in mid-July, subject to the approval of the business case. And planning for detailed design and early contractor involvement is well underway now. So we're working through procurement of design and contractor services, and we're planning in the meantime. So, going back to the real reasons why we are here, our sludge now. So we produce a sludge which is largely untreated. So you may recall from previous presentations, we've talked about what's in our sludge. And there are three components in our sludge. There's some inert stuff that we can't do anything about, bits of stones and things that get through. There's organic matter, which is bugs, fecal matter, that sort of thing. And that's really the bit that creates the public health, odour and vermin attraction risk around sludge. So in sludge engineering terms, we talk about odour and vector attraction, vector being vermin, and the need to reduce that. The third thing is water, and our current sludge dewatering process just gets rid of what water it can. But when that sludge is produced in that dewatered form, it still contains its pathogens, and it's highly volatile. By that we mean it's really prone to breakdown. And one of the challenges about Wellington is that we use a high rate wastewater treatment process. The reason for that is that we're geographically constrained. We haven't got a lot of space to build treatment plants, so when the plants were built, they were built with a very high rate process. And what that means is it produces a less mature sludge that is far more prone to breakdown. Our older conventional plants in New Zealand, Hamilton, Auckland, Invercargill, Christchurch, the likes, are more conventional and produce a more stable sludge. It contains a lot of water. While we've got rid of about 25% of the water by the time it gets to the landfill, there's still a great deal of water in it, and we can't attack that water with the current dewatering process. We have only one place we can put it in its current form. Because of its pathogens, its public health risk, its proneness to attract vectors or vermin, there is only one place we can put it, and that comes down to the heart of the critical resilience issue we have with sludge management in Wellington. And because of that odour and its ability to leach, I've personally seen trucks of sludge in this state whereby by the time it's been transported, there is a layer of a foot deep of water on the top by the time it gets to its destination, of putrescent and stuff that has to be dealt with, because more water comes out of it in its transport. And when I compare this to some of the plants I saw in the States, these same issues played out. So one of the reasons why people were doing upgrades over there is they had to transport dewatered, undigested, untreated sludge to composting, vermicomposting, landfill disposal sites. And I remember one story in Detroit where they were carting it down the highway, and they were within a mile radius of the interstate where they were carting it. They were getting odour complaints on a regular basis as a result of the untreated nature of it. So it's a critical problem.
Chris, do you want to run through the whole thing, or do you want any questions or clarification as you go through?
I think we'll run through the whole thing, if that's all right, Your
Okay,
Worship.
if you can just hold that
Yep.
then, please, Diane. Yeah.
There's a lot of slides.
If we do nothing, this is what we are faced with. So we worked with Nathan's team, and Nathan's team facilitated a great process to come up with our base case, because we were really challenged about what we do with the base case. Bearing in mind, we're facing a southern landfill that requires a consent for its extension, and our consent expires in June 2026 for disposal of sludge to the landfill. So we are facing a problem, which is, where do we send that sludge if we can't send it to southern landfill? And the reality is that the only viable alternative as a base case would be to send it to a commercial landfill. The nearest commercial landfill is Bonnie Glen in Martin, which is a long way away. Martin, so southeast of Wanganui, between Fielding and Wanganui. So we would need to send our sludge to have a viable alternative, and that has been our base case. Just to add to that, because of the high pathogen content and the volatile nature of the sludge, we would need to very carefully transport that. So we're talking about a fleet of pretty unique trucks to transport our sludge. And one of the concerns we have is the significant transport costs, carbon emissions from carting that water, and the community pressures that come from the odorous nature of the sludge. And of course, we're all well aware of the volatility of fuel costs and the like at the moment, and what that may do, expose us to if we are reliant on a solution that has a high level of transportation involved in it. So, to get to our options, so we used what I like to refer to as a funnel model, where we started with lots and lots of options, and we worked our way down to a shortlist. And this process has taken 2 years and has been independently reviewed as we've gone. So the first stage was that we came up with a range of potential options. We got a bunch of technical experts to come up with all sorts of options under the sun, things that were in the lab, things that were established internationally and locally, and everything in between. We then evaluated those options against 3 key criteria: maturity of technology, because we want to be leading edge, but we don't want to be bleeding edge. We looked at the quality of the product it would produce, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't produce the right product in the right way, we fundamentally wouldn't meet our objectives of decoupling this from the landfill. And we also looked at plant footprint, because we're constrained in space in Wellington for these sorts of facilities. So we looked at that. And what I should say is that in parallel to the process options, we were looking at site options as well. And we had 2 viable site options, given the nature of the activity we want to undertake. So going through that analysis, we came down to 9 different process options across 2 potential sites, Moa Point and Kerry's Gully. And I'll go through some of these options in a moment. But essentially, those were the ones that passed muster on those first criteria. We did a little bit of technical development in those, understood key constraints and issues with them, and from that we were able to get early cost estimates on which we could compare the options. Oh, we seem to be stuck. Sorry, slight technical issue. We'll be... Just go back from there. Okay, I'll just leave it there anyway. So, and then from that, from those 9 options across 2 sites, we did multi-criteria assessment. So that involved independent technical specialists, Wellington Water, Wellington City Council officers, iwi as well. And we went through a multi-criteria assessment that looked at the function, would it achieve what we need it to, mana whenua values. So iwi had given us some good direction around the key issues that concern them, and really also the opportunities that they would like to see us do with this project around gas utilisation and nutrients and things like that. Complexity, environmental impact and consentability, and cost, whole of life cost. So that's the criteria which we assess this. Out of that process came four shortlist options that we then developed concepts for, and then, as I said earlier, we worked with EY on a base case option. And then those 5 options, the 4 options plus the base case, have been what's been subjected to the economic analysis plus the other assessment that appears in the business case. So we've assessed each option against strategic fit, community and business needs, value for money, affordability, and manufacturing values. And just a really quick run through on what those shortlist options are. So the first one we considered was digestion and thermal drying. So digestion is a fairly conventional process. What that is essentially putting the sludge in tanks, keeping it warm at about 37 degrees. It's essentially like the guts of a human being. The sludge breaks down over 20 odd days. It gives off gas. And as a result, you get what's known as a stabilized product. So a lot of that volatility in that product is gone. You then put that through sludge dewatering, as we do now, and then you dry it to produce a dry product. So that was option number 1, reasonably conventional. Option number 2 was to do the same process but put a thermal hydrolysis plant on the front end of it. Now the reason you do this is that you don't need to build anywhere near as many digesters. Digesters are expensive if you have to build lots of them. So we were able to significantly optimise it by putting a thermal hydrolysis plant in front of it. And essentially what the thermal hydrolysis does is it pressure cooks a sludge. And what that does is it kills the bugs, but it also breaks down the sludge so that the digesters can work far better. They produce more biogas, and that biogas can be used to create steam, which then drives the thermal hydrolysis process. So it's a self-sustainable process. And then again, thermally drying it. The third option was digestion, lysis, digestion, plus thermal drying. So that's essentially a reconfiguration of the process above. And what we find is that this is used in bigger plants. Wellington is right at the lower end of when this becomes feasible as an option, but it was one that was considered. And then the final one was something quite different, gasification, where you dry the sludge and then you put it through gasification, which is a thermal process to create what's known as biochar, a coal char type substance, with a little bit of, they add a little bit of oxygen into a controlled burn process and it produces biochar. There's not very many of those sorts of plants in the world. There's one small one in Australia, I think. So that was the kind of options that were on the table. What was interesting is that in the multi-criteria assessment, the same options kept coming up in terms of using digestion at your heart of your plant and then thinking about what you could do to optimise that, other than that gasification option, obviously. So I'll just hand over to Nathan.
Thanks, Chris. Can everyone hear me? Yep, great. So once, I guess, we had comfort that there was a base case that was kind of feasible and reasonable, and we had our options set clearly well defined and down to a narrower set, the next step that we undertook, and clearly our scope of works was around the development of a economic cost-benefit analysis, or CBA. So just kind of quickly, maybe at the outset, to a bit of an explanation about CBA and what it is and what it isn't. So it's an economic assessment. It is not a financial assessment. And so as part of that economic CBA, we've tried to monetise as many elements of the decision as we could, but there remain a range of elements that can't be monetised, and effectively they've been picked up through the MCA work that Chris has already referred to. So in terms of the CBA itself and its kind of core structure, I guess we used a range of inputs into the CBA. Many of those actually came from the technical team and the design work that Chris mentioned a bit earlier on. So if we're thinking about things like chemicals and power and that kind of thing, that clearly is related to the specific design that we're looking at, as well as a range of publicly available stats and facts and figures and that kind of thing, like expected electricity price and that kind of thing. So in terms of the CBA itself, as I say, concords with Treasury kind of guidance and standards, and ran that through over the past couple of months, and we now are in a position where we kind of have some figures that have come out of the back end. So I was keen today to walk through, I guess, the inputs that went into that at a line-by-line level, so everyone understands the basis of the assumptions and kind of where the numbers are trending. And then I'll hand back to Chris to talk through some of the wider MCA elements. So in terms of the inputs, breaking it down by costs and benefits, I'll start with costs. And again, all of these cost line items have been applied to varying degrees to the options. And so we effectively have a line item for each of our options. So first is chemical costs and the chemical costs involved in the sludge treatment process. And effectively that has been a different number used depending on what the actual solution is. So that's really very much related to the design process. The power costs, very similar again. Effectively, these have been technical inputs that we have used and picked up and have been taken from the design process. And then in terms of the prices that we have used for the power costs themselves, they have been taken from MB's industrial prices that they publish annually as effectively a view of what prices might be in the future. The costs of the pipeline have used the same electricity figures as I quoted before for power costs for the dewatering plants and the digestion plants, and the pipeline costs, the pipeline power consumption itself, again, has come from the technical team. Labour costs, so there is a labour component to managing this facility, and there is slightly different labour inputs depending on which option we are looking at, that basically spans between 1 and 3 FTEs, and then we've used market rates about what you'd expect to see a reasonable labour cost for that particular employment type. We then have maintenance costs associated with Moa Point and with the pipeline itself. So maintenance costs at Moa Point, we've used 2% of the capital cost as a maintenance figure. And again, that differs by option depending on what the capital cost of the option is. And maintenance costs associated with the pipeline is 0.5% of the capital cost of the pipeline itself, bearing in mind that in some of the options, we will be decommissioning that pipeline. And so in essence, those costs are not incurred in the future. Fuel cost only applies to the gasification option, and we've taken effectively inputs from the technical team about how much diesel would be consumed, and then diesel prices from the MB forecast of what fuel costs look like. Then we have 2 costs associated with transport and disposal in Wellington. And so sludge transport costs are associated with getting sludge from the Western Treatment Plant in Koroi to Moa Point as kind of one data point. The second is around dry sludge to the southern landfill. And then the third data point is the transport of treated sludge from Koroi to the southern landfill. Then we have the disposal cost of disposing the southern landfill itself, and that's using effectively rates that have been provided to us by the landfill. Then we have an asset renewal cost line, which is really looking at the replacement of a range of items, so some of the capital equipment at Moa Point, the pipeline where it is relevant to replace it, and we've assumed some dates and replacement costs associated with that. I think 2030 and a $60 million replacement. And then we also have the replacement of the dewatering plant at the southern landfill, which is a $20 million assumption. And then the next 2 costs only apply to our non-base case options, which is effectively, to the base case option, which is the additional trucking costs to get sludge from Wellington to Bonnie Glen, and that 170-kilometre journey. And we've been provided effectively figures around lower and higher kind of price expectations about what it would cost to undertake that transportation, and we've taken a midpoint range of it, and then we've used the volumes that have been provided to us that kind of come out of the facility. And also we have been provided a rough estimate of what disposal fees at Bonnie Glen might be as well. So we've effectively taken the sludge volumes and applied it to those disposal fees. And then finally, we've included a decommissioning line item for the assets that would be no longer needed in some of the options as well. So that's on the cost side. Then on the benefit side.
Can we just, sorry to interrupt, can we just pause and get the slide sorted out? Because we still can't actually see anything that's on the slide.
There's an awful lot of information to keep track of without something to look at.
There's the information that Nathan's just going through is not on the slides. We just got the results coming up shortly.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Apologies.
Can we just bring it all up because it does give. Thanks. And just.
And one more.
And then so that's on the cost side. So you can see a fairly, I guess, thorough run through of cost items that, like I say, have been applied to each of the options in differing ways.
Okay, thank you.
And then on the benefit side of the ledger, yeah. Yeah.
Numbers are very tip-top secret, clearly.
I wonder if there's time to actually print something off. Yeah, because it is just a lot of numbers.
No, but online.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, if you didn't hear that, we'll make sure that all the slides get round to everybody. I understand they was emailed, but not all of us got them for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. Letitia's still trying to call those back up again.
I've just resent them to all councillors.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the internet. Yeah. The problem here, councillors who are online, is that the internet keeps coming up with internet unstable. So
okay.
Yeah. Right. There you go.
Okay, so that's the cost side of the ledger. That is the biggest side of the ledger. In terms of the benefits side of the ledger, at the outset, we contemplated, as with any CBA, you should typically be looking at the benefit that the particular investment provides. I guess in this case, the challenge is that the provision of sludge management services in all of these options, we did not look at what would happen if you didn't provide any of these services, because effectively that's seen as unpalatable. And so what we've done is we've really looked at the additional benefits that you would get over and above effectively that system. And so for all of the options that are not the base case, there are two categories of benefits that we have looked at. The first is related to the biogas production that Chris referred to before. Effectively, that's a valuable product that can be sold and used in other applications, and so that has a benefit in of itself. And then also we looked at from a resilience standpoint. If we do not have that pipeline in operation, then that means that there's a lower risk of effectively that pipeline breaking, and we've all seen what's happened in the media in the last couple of years about breaking of that pipeline and how expensive it is. So we took a probability-weighted assessment of kind of what that resilience benefit might be.
Those aren't there.
They're in all the options that are not the base case, because in the base case you still need to rely on the pipeline and you don't produce any of the biogas. So where is essentially with a cost item, cost side of the ledger, and a benefits side of the ledger, like I say, that applies to the options on the right-hand side. And what we've done is we've looked at the output of that. We've looked at that in an undiscounted and a discounted fashion. So for an economic CBA, we should be looking at a discounted result, because that's effectively your single point in time estimate of all of your options, and it enables like-for-like comparison in a way that undiscounted does not. And so the results of that, those net cost assessment, is what you can see up on the screen at the moment. So the kind of headline takeaway is that from a purely economic CBA standpoint, the base case that Chris has described is technically the best from a numeric standpoint. Like I say, that does not take into account all of the factors that you'd consider in your decision making, but from the items that we could monetize, the base case was seen as the economically most efficient. But if that was not a palatable solution, then effectively LD and thermal drying was seen as the next best and kind of lowest economic cost alternative beyond that.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll move on to talking about our future, because what this boils down to is being able to produce a grade A biosolid. A grade A is a term that started in the US under regulation. So the EPA regulates biosolids management in the US, and grade A was a term coined there. It's now used in New Zealand in guidance. We don't have a regulatory standard yet. I think it's coming, but we have a guideline by which the regional councils who have to consent the use of biosolids on land, they follow that guidance. And a grade A biosolid refers to two things. It refers to a thing called, it refers to pathogen reduction, which I think we all understand, getting rid of the nasties that could give us a public health issue. And the second is what's called vector attraction reduction. Vector attraction is about attracting vectors, which are vermin, and that's just a standard industry measure of how volatile the sludge is, its ability to degrade, its kind of humanistic elements to it. So producing a grade A biosolid means that it has very low or no pathogen count. So you have to thermally treat it in some way, like pasteurization, to get rid of the pathogens. It has low or no volatile organic matter. So that's the organic stuff that can break down. And the way you treat that is to stabilize it. So you use digestion. If you put it on into composting for a long time, you could get the same, but that's essentially that. Grade A biosolids, because it's been thermally treated and the organics have been broken down, has naturally got a lower volume and weight, and has multiple ways in which you can dispose of it, depending on what the product is that you produce. And I'll come into that a little bit more later. It's far easier to transport because a lot of that water that could seep out of it is gone through those thermal processes, and it's not going to degrade, so it's a lower odour product. And out of a lot of the processes that you use, we produce biogas. Biogas is a utilisable process. And there are a couple of ways. So in the US, for example, in San Francisco, they're using biogas and re-injecting it into the natural gas grid so that other users can pick it up. And by and large, that's where the United States is moving to. The other option is to produce electricity and use the electricity. We're doing analysis on both options at the moment. But that is it. But it's all about requiring pathogen reduction and vector attraction reduction treatment to produce grade A. And all of the options that I presented today produce a grade A biosolids. It's about the most efficient path to that. So just a quick run through of our preferred option. And these are all photos of actual plants that I've taken overseas. So just a quick 6 steps to thermally hydrolyzing your sludge. So the first stage is to screen it. So sludge contains bits of rubbish and things in it that just get through the treatment process. The first thing we do is we screen it. Those little machines up there are what we use to do that. The little screenings that come out of it, it's like cotton bud tips and bits of grit and things like that. We send to landfill. We wash them and send them to landfill. There's no further use for those. Typically, you produce like a bin full a week sort of thing. That's the size. Then we put them through dewatering. So that's a bit like what we do now. We spin water out of it, and that's to produce like a moist cakey type product. It's a bit sticky. It's not a very pleasant thing, but it produces a cake-like product, and that's the stuff that we can then treat. We then put it through thermal hydrolysis. So that example there is a plant at Virginia Beach in the States. The States has about 6 thermal hydrolysis plants, and essentially that's a plant that we buy on a skid and it gets installed. And essentially, as I said, that's a pressure cooker. What that's doing is it's holding the sludge for 20 or 30 minutes at over 100 degrees Celsius at pressure, and that rips open the cells, because the sludge contains lots of cells. It rips open those cell linings and allows it to digest afterwards. So the stuff that comes out of that is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. Don't want to put you off ice cream, but it's a bit like chocolate Frosty Boy ice cream. It's the best analogy I can give you for that stuff. One of the issues that I saw over there, this is a fascinating thing. So one of the issues I saw over there is, and we've been doing a lot of work to characterise our sludge, so work out what's in it. I went to a conference paper while I was over there by a guy who's doing a PhD on the fat content in sludge, and the US has 35% more fat in their sludge than the average European plant. That's diet. That's all to do with diet. I can vouch that there is good access to burgers and chips in the States. I don't know how we compare. I'm going to send him some data to see if he can do a bit of comparison for us. We might be frightened. So, having done all that work to produce a yummy substance for digestion, we then put it in the digesters and we hold it there for somewhere between 12 and 15 days. And there's bugs inside those digesters that go to work, and they just eat all the yummy organic food. One of the things we have to consider with this plant is how we start up those digesters. So I went to some interesting talks and some interesting operators about what they do there. And it turns out it takes a wee while to start feeding a digester on thermalized hydrolyzed sludge. But in theory, you could do the same to a human if you left them long enough. Yeah, you could over 100 days you could feed them sludge. Moving on, then you go into dewatering and centrifuges. Again, so once you've been through digesters, a lot more water is available. So the product coming out of a digester is actually liquid again. So you bring it to a solid, you heat it, you digest it, and all those bugs turn it into a liquid again, but that liquid allows all of the water to get taken out very, very easily afterwards. So you get left with a liquid and a solid after that second stage of dewatering. At that point, that produces a cake which is low in odour. It's got a ammonia smell, so you can pick it up and touch it because it's pathogen free. Yep, absolutely. Rub it in my hands, and it's sort of like it feels like topsoil, screen topsoil. It's what would I say? You can smell the ammonia when you pick it up, but it very quickly dissipates. Very quickly dissipates. Ammonia does that. What we're doing is adding a thermal dryer step. So the thermal dry, so the dewatering will take it to about 30% dry solids. That's like a soil product. The drying takes it to a dry coffee granule type product. There's no other way to describe it. It's sort of like broken up coffee granules. Doing the thermal drying also gets rid of the ammonia. So the ammonia staves off during the drying process. So it's from that you get a very low odor, safe, pathogen-free or low pathogen product. So that's kind of the 6 steps to sludge treatment that we want to go through. We put that through an odor scrubber, so we've got a 2-stage scrubbing process on our plant. So the odor gets picked up and put through a scrubber, and then essentially absorbed by the carbon in the stuff, and water's flashed over that carbon, and all that water goes back to the sewage treatment process. It gets treated within the sewage treatment process. It's all self-contained. We don't allow that to go to atmosphere. Yep. That's a really
Hey,
good point.
Chris, I'm just really conscious of time. If we're going to have time for questions, can you just select which slides you're going to
Absolutely.
go through for the next 5 minutes? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm a bit enthusiastic about sludge. So having produced our having gone to the States and seen this, and listening to the technical boffids, the operators and everybody, I'm absolutely sure we are on the right path producing grade A biosolids. It's the future, it's where everyone is going if they haven't already. Typically, I say in Europe we are, they're 20 years ahead of us in technology. US is usually 10 years ahead of us in technology in terms of wastewater treatment, and we are doing what they were doing 6-8 years ago in the States. So we're right on that leading edge of what the US has been implementing. And international experience is telling us that co-locating this with our biggest wastewater treatment plant at Moa Point is absolutely the right thing to do. We are designing the plant for the ultimate capacity at Moa Point. So Moa Point has a finite capacity. At some point, it's got room for expansion, and we've looked at that at some point in the future. And we've made sure that this plant aligns to the ultimate design capacity. So you're not just building a plant that'll last you 20 years or 30 years. It will last the life of Moa Point in terms of capacity. Okay. We've done population projections out to 50 years. And of course, population projections are a very subjective thing, depending on policy and stuff, infill and all that. The Moa Point plant has somewhere between 45, 50 years before it taps out at capacity. Bearing in mind that in that time, technology will change, so it may well be that Moa Point, so Moa Point will last a lot longer than that. It's just that it has out to that sort of capacity. But we've also allowed for high growth at Karori Western Wastewater Treatment Plant. And I've been looking at technological advances, so what's coming down the pipeline from Europe, and everything aligns to thermal hydrolysis and digestion. So because they've had that for 20 years in Europe, they're now thinking about, well, what do we add on to that? So it would be easy in the future for us to consider adding technology to those processes because we're aligned with what Europe are doing. I won't go too far into the community engagement, but suffice to say we've had 3 rounds of a community engagement. We've had the LTP, we've had community engagements focused on the commercial sector in April this year, and we've had one-on-one engagement with residents associations. What I would say about the resident associations is they've all been supportive to very supportive of the solution. There's been a few local effects things raised, like Guardians of the Bay around visual aspects and interfaces with the airport, Strathmore Park around odour and things, and we've been working through and listening to those and incorporate that to the design. Really quickly on the project funding. So I would say that the way we're attacking funding and cost estimates on this project is like the experience I've just been through building a house. So what I did at the start of building my house is I sat down and worked out what I could afford in mortgage repayments. And that's what we're essentially doing with the CIP team, is we've been working out doing a lot of affordability analysis on what we can afford, and that's helped us inform that element. At the same time, we're doing design, and that'll inform how much the facility will cost, and then by February next year, we'll be at what's known as a Class 3 cost estimate, which is having gone through the design process, and then we need to bring those 2 things together to match affordability with cost. So that's the process that we are going through. So we're going through a very structured cost estimate process, and at the same time understanding our affordability and how much we can afford. And then we bring the 2 together. In terms of key risks, I'm not going to go through these in detail. There'll be more of this in the business case, but suffice to say we've been working through all of our key risks, our key strategic risks, and understanding how we deal with each of them. One of the key strategies is that we're bringing on a head contractor early to work through the design and construction process so that we design something that's constructible, we get the intel of the contractor and allow for more efficient, cost-effective construction processes, which is critical to this plant. Just quickly, so we are using the council's Infrastructure Delivery Framework, I think it is, IDF framework, 6-stage process for delivering the project. Right now, we are at the point of just about to lodge consents and obviously present the business case to council. From here, we'll be moving through that ECI design process and looking to kick off enabling works early next year, simply because we've got a short time frame to build this plant. And then move through detailed design at the same time, and lots of construction activity commencing kind of Q1, Q2 next year, in a nutshell, with view to having this thing commissioned by June 2026. So the resolutions that you will get on the 30th of June will be, you'll be asked to approve the thermal hydrolysis, digestion and thermal drying as the preferred option, and delegate responsibility to the Chief Infrastructure Officer to progress the notices of requirement. That's essentially a designation consent for the project. You'll also be asked to note the status of the project in terms of land acquisition. So we are continuing negotiation on that, and we'll revert to council obviously for approval on purchase of the land for this plant. We are progressing with early contractor involvement to deliver accurate project pricing by the end of Q1 next year, and we're progressing the IFF funding solution with CIP. And in August, we'll come back to you for approval on the funding arrangement and formal approval of the project, including cost. So in summary, if I was to sum up our presentation in 4 points, the first I'd say is we have a unique sludge that requires careful management. It's highly volatile, readily degrades and produces significant odour, and we need to manage that. That's the reason why we've got to where we are today with landfilling the sludge and the way we have to manage it in the landfill, but it also directs how we can move forward with treating it. We've concluded through the business case and quite a long process of optioneering that the preferred option is thermal hydrolysis, digestion and drying at Moa Point. This will produce a grade A product that will enable us to look into a diverse range of ways to manage the sludge in the future as a treated product. We'll continue to work with CIP to finalise the funding arrangements and come back to you in August for approval. And we want to use the ECI process to support the cost estimation of the project and get a really close alignment between constructability, design and cost. Questions?
Thank you very much for the enthusiastic presentation, Chris. Nathan. So questions. I've got Diane and Nicola, the first two. Can you, Letitia, can you show me the screen so I can see if there's any councillors on screen as well? And then I've got a couple of questions as well. Diane.
Okay, I'll go very quick because I know we're running out of time, but and this may be in your business case, but I want to better understand the resilience and the temporary redundancy of this solution if things go wrong. And I'm thinking about Christchurch in particular. So how do we make, and it's part of the risk management of that so that we don't end up with the Christchurch situation. So you don't need to address that now, but I'm looking for that sort of information.
I can assure you that, yeah, there's been a lot of thought in that and fire risk.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'm also really interested to understand the broad financial implications. We're looking at this as a project in itself. I know we've got the separate funding mechanism, but if you take our residents, what are they going to feel? And I know you're talking about the affordability aspect, but I'm interested to hear more about that. And probably and where would this project sit in priority of other projects? If we had to cut costs or we had to cut projects, where would this be from a priority perspective? Yeah, exactly. But I want to be, are we explicit enough about that so that we're clear on that? And there's a lot of information in here, but I'm really interested to understand how we communicate with Wellingtonians. I didn't see the word people a lot in here. I know it's an engineering thing, and it's great, but I just want to flag about the communication. And then finally, again, don't have to answer that now, but it's about, I want to understand, you talked about Karori, and I really, and I want to understand that a bit more about the connection and that. So, but again, you can address that offline if you like.
Go for your life and as much of that as you can deal with now, Chris.
Absolutely. So I can answer 3 of those, and I'll probably revert to Siobhan for one of them. But the first one around resilience. So we've put a lot of thought into resilience so that we understand what the bare minimum product we have to produce under all conditions is, which is a grade A product, but also balancing that with cost. So what we are doing is going what I would call belt and braces with resilience up till and including digestion, and then we're putting one thermal dryer in. And what that will do is always give us a grade A product. It just will mean that if we have to switch the dryer off to do some maintenance, we have we've got a backup option, which is to send grade A biosolids to out. So we've been working through that, and there's been a lot of technical investigation into getting that balance of resilience and cost right. The one around the public is a really good one. I've been speaking to our communications advisor and starting to plan what public consultation will look like after lodgement of the consent. So we've been working through residents' associations and thinking about public open days and things once consent is lodged, and totally agree the messaging around that needs to be there. So I've been working with our comms advisor to summarise all the comms we've had to date and the sorts of feedback and questions we've been getting, so that we can form a comms plan for post-consent lodgement and open days and the like. What was the other question?
You'll involve elected members in that because we're facing the public on this. So if you could,
yes, I'll make a note of that. Thanks.
Can I also just add we have engaged quite extensively on the levy. So the levy, which is going to be the impact on ratepayers, essentially, we did an extensive engagement.
Okay, thanks. I've got Nicola, Jill, and Sarah.
Thank you. So, you said
Sorry,
on, then it came off again. Sorry. Do you want me to repeat it?
Yeah.
So if Europe is further ahead than the United States, and this is a long-term project, why aren't we following European technology?
So we are following European technology, so we've been looking carefully. So we've been using European technology providers to give us a good understanding of what they're up to. So thermal hydrolysis has become over the last 15 to 20 years in the UK and Europe the preferred option, long stay option for them. The things that they're investigating now are what I would call in the weeds. So things like emerging contaminant removal, PFAS, that sort of those really tiny little things that the Europeans are really starting to get nitpicky about in their sludge. That has nothing to do with thermal hydrolysis. Thermal hydrolysis has become the mainstay European process. The reason why I went to the States was more about the fact that they have got more recent experience in starting to implement the technology. So understanding their story, because we're going to go through the same. Okay. Europe has got a lot of that on their back doorstep. And I sort of felt like I'd learned more from going to the States to look at those.
Thank you. So the next one is, I was a bit alarmed at the suburb affordability to see the Lambton suburbs right up the front, Oriental Bay, and then too long. I think it was next Strathmore, which is not an affluent suburb, and then Mount Victoria. I mean, what's that based on?
Where's that?
That was the suburb affordability slide that we had.
Can you?
So affordability is an equation of rates plus the levy divided by the average household income. So it does move around, and what you do get is you get a profile skew. So
could we just have that slide up again, because I do think Strathmore was number 2, and I find, but I had to, I was reading it like this.
Which number slide?
Who's got control of the slides?
I do understand the graph you're talking about.
I'd like to see it.
The financial one.
It's not related to the fact that I live in Mount Victoria.
Stratham will be number 2 because household income is lower.
Correct. You're correct. Yeah. So it's to give the graph is to give an indication of how all suburbs largely sit underneath the affordability threshold, which is typically at 5%. Yes, each suburb has a different profile. That profile represents the ratepayers in it and how they disclose their income levels. So you'll regularly see places like Oriental Bay, for instance, at a high level, and that's because their income levels are more complex. Strathmore Park is up and coming. It has a low average household income, but slightly higher rates. So therefore, you just get a higher level of affordability. But nevertheless, it still sits comfortably below that 5% threshold.
High is the value of the house, so it means afford.
Okay, I'm going to go to, you done, Nicola? Yeah. I'm going to go to Jill.
Kia ora, thank you. It's very interesting to understand the technical detail there. My question's around engagement with mana whenua, because obviously this is a very complex and sensitive issue for mana whenua. And I noticed at the end on the background information there's a recommendation of development of a charter with iwi through Tākaihere. I'm just curious to hear what involvement mana whenua have had until now and how you think that charter will progress.
Yes, certainly. So in the first part of that, we had early discussions with iwi right when we were starting to assess options so that we could understand what would be on the table and what would not, and understand from iwi. It was really fascinating discussions around traditional management of human waste and what sort of processes they would favour. So natural processes like digestion were more favoured because that more aligns with it. There was discussions around sending untreated sludge over rohi boundaries. There was discussion around sites of wahitapu and so on. So we had a lot of really meaningful discussion, and then we involved them in the options assessment process as Ngāti Toa and Taranaki Whānui to come up with a preferred option. To move forward now, and then we've been stuck in the technical weeds for a wee while in the CBA and stuff, and now we're coming out the other side of that. What we would like to do is put a charter in place to really, one of the key areas we need to focus on is a biosolids reuse. And the exemplar of that, if there's a really good paper about it, is the Kaikoura experience, where they formed a community reference group and a partnership with iwi, and then the council enabled the community reference group and iwi to make decisions about what to do with the biosolids. So that's a journey in itself, and it's something we would like to do through a partnership over the next, say, it'll probably be a 5-year journey, but work through to support really good community and iwi-based decision-making on the future of the biosolids once it's in a treated form that we can actually do something with it, because there's nothing we could do now. But it's a journey, a conversation we want to start, and so we've started to have started to work with iwi on what that charter might look like.
Thank you.
All good, Jill? Cool, okay. Sarah?
Yeah, so apologies if I've missed something, but I just wondered if you could explain what you meant by high growth in Karori Western wastewater treatment plants being taken into account.
Yeah, certainly. So just stepping back slightly, so the catchments up to Johnsonville all go to the 2 Wellington wastewater treatment plants, Moa Point and Karori. Sewers split essentially, and there's a sewer running down to the Karori wastewater treatment plant. It's taking 5 to 10%. Both plants are geographically constrained, but what nobody yet has done the exercise, and in fact we're about to start that, to understand how big you could make Karori's wastewater treatment plant. So in lieu of a firm, this is the full design capacity, what we did was look at population in the catchments that serve Karori, and we looked at low, medium, high and very high population projections and settled on the use of a high population growth using demographic data and projections provided by experts to come up with, we think this is how much more sludge Karori could produce over the next, say, 50 years, and that was put into our calculations, so we build the plant big enough.
So, so it would all, even if it went to initially to Karori, it would eventually go down to be treated at the sludge treatment plant.
Yeah, that's correct. Absolutely, Councillor Free. The new sludge facility is designed to take the sludge from Karori as well as the bulk of it coming from Moa Point. Yeah.
And then my other question sort of related in that case, what would we do with the existing pipe network we've got? Obviously, I'm hearing that we'd keep the incoming pipes the same, but what about the pipe network that goes to the landfill from our point? Was the plan to keep that as redundancy or...?
No, the landfill will require the land ultimately that the dewatering plant is built on. We essentially, that infrastructure is getting past its design life, I call it that. So the pipelines would have little residual value in terms of resilience and redundancy. It would cost a lot of money to keep them sufficiently in service. You could bring them online very quickly. So our plan would be to plug them and not use them again.
And that led me to the bit that I missed. I must have missed something when you were talking about if you had to take one of those drying plants out of action. Mm-hmm. What was sorry, I realise I missed this, but can you just go over it again?
So as I talked about, the treatment process is essentially 3 key stages. You have thermal hydrolysis, digestion and drying. Mm. When it comes out of the digesters, it comes out as a stabilised soil-like product.
Oh, okay.
We can use that. The drying just gets rid of all the rest of the water and makes it even more usable. So our fallback is if the thermal dryer isn't online, we'll still produce a stabilised, low pathogen product. Yeah.
So it's still truckable somewhere else. So it's not the end of the world if you have to do some maintenance. Okay, thank you.
Chris, a few questions from me. And Jill, is your hand back up again, or is that, just haven't taken it down? Okay. The first one, just a very simple one. When you talk about stability, is that the whole thing about water leaching out? Is that what you're referring to?
No, stability is referring to the biodegradable stuff in it. So biodegrading, giving off gases and odour as it biodegrades in the truck. So Wellington sludge is so unstable that when in the pipeline, just from getting from Moa Point to Carey's Gully, which is only about 2.5 hour journey for your average molecule of sludge, it already is fermenting in that time. So it's very volatile and starts breaking down almost immediately. And it's the organics that cause it to biodegrade.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Second one is, when you went through all the different bits of the cost components, you mentioned, you gave us quite a long list there. What you had maintenance costs, and you had asset renewal costs, which I presume is de facto is depreciation.
De facto, yes, but it's not a formal depreciation calculation in the way a financial model is.
Okay, so where do we put in depreciation and the interest cost, and then what you didn't say is how much it actually costs to build the thing in the first place, which is the amount we'd have to borrow.
So
depending on which
I didn't mention the capital cost, agreed, and the capital cost has been taken into account. Sorry, I was working through the operating cost side of things, but yes, it is included in all.
So the capital cost is included in all of those net cost discounted. So you've picked that cost of that up. Have you plugged the interest rate? The interest and depreciation into these?
This is an economic CBA, so this does not take into account depreciation, interest, inflation, escalation. This is an economic CBA. It's not a financial model.
Right.
That comes later.
So this is the cost over what, the life of the plant?
So we've got a 50-year life of the model, and then we've effectively discounted it based on Treasury 5% rate. So this is economic CVA designed to help inform your preferred option, and then later on down the track, a formal financial case will be run that comes to actually what it's going to cost.
Okay, so you'll plug in also the capital related costs, and so the only things that are missing there are essentially the depreciation and the interest on the capital cost. Yeah, so you'll plug those in, which will increase those numbers. Okay,
but
that's over 50 years.
Yeah, and the underlying assumptions that are used in the CBA should be carried through your financial model.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And in terms of consent, thank you. In terms of consent, when are we planning on going for the landfill consent? And are we going to try and align these at roughly the same time? Because obviously they do talk to each other, and I thought the timing was roughly the same. So the answer is.
So for landfill, Andy, we're looking at November. Okay. So it's not the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're able, when we're thinking about the communications, telling the story. Obviously, the stories are linked, aren't they? So how are we going to?
Yeah, so I've been having fortnightly calls, Your Worship, with the landfill team to discuss how we connect our comms together and tell an overall waste minimisation, waste management story as opposed to just a sludge by itself.
Yeah, good.
And the regional council have given us a good steer around that too, and kind of the timing of these consents.
No, that's great. Two other things. Chris, we talked to those folks about vermiculture.
Mm-hmm.
Where does, if that were part of this, because you said that the stage one, which I'm taking as the bit to get to, if you had your six stage bit, it was more your 6 stage bit, I think was the right diagram there.
Yeah.
Where would that fit into that if that was an option, which was?
I'll just put that.
I suspect it's that one, isn't it?
So
yep.
So if we considered vermicomposting, and this would need to run through that community reference group, but if we considered vermicomposting as part of our options, we would take a side stream off just before the thermal dryer, so just before stage 6, and then send it off to the vermicomposting farm as one of our kind of disposal routes.
Yeah. So you effectively your stage, when you talked about it as a 2-stage proposition, your stage 1 is the first 5, and your stage 2 is the 6th one.
That's correct.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Can we just be really clear? So the preferred option is the whole lot with thermal drying.
Yeah, no, I understood that.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the last question I had is the capacity of Moa Point. Now, you said what you're saying is that you were basically saying, so it's essentially it's Moa Point plus Karori. What you were saying is 50 years high growth, sort of growth. So that was, I guess the question I'm asking is, in fact, how many people under current technology can we actually accommodate with the space, the capacity to be able to do that within those 2 combined catchments?
I would need to come back with a precise number, but essentially one of the scenarios, and I can't remember the numbers, but one of the scenarios we looked at was a city full scenario. So if you took all the possible infill, and between Moa Point and Karori, they could take that under a high growth. Just when we get there is the question. And what I've found, Your Worship, through all the modelling is that it's so dependent on things like infill policies, whether we can start stacking housing.
My question was more about the technical capacity, the capacity of the plant, and so the plant can take 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, whatever it is, number of people, as opposed to leave the urban planners and that side to work out how many houses we can put in and how that's going to work. But how many technically people can you accommodate with the plant?
We've done broad modelling on it. We're doing more detailed modelling as we speak. I have an engineer working on that to give you a more precise number. I can come back to you with the numbers I've got. I just can't quite them off the top of my head.
It'd be really useful. Yep. Thank you. Okay. That's my questions. Are there any others? I don't see any. So look, thank you very much. So we're obviously going to have a paper which is going to come to council next week. So that will be in the public arena. How detailed will that paper be in terms of the because there's clearly that should get some interest, the comms around that thinking. So could you just fill us in on that one before we close?
Yeah, so we're putting together a comms at the moment, including some FAQs that we can publish. We've got a project website. We'll get them up on that because we know that will generate some interest around that bit. There'll be a cover paper and appended to it a business case, which will be a fairly lengthy document with hopefully a good executive summary that makes good reading.
Yeah. Look, if you can let me know how that's planned to be done, then we'll work through that. Councillors and staff, both online and here, look, thank you very much for what's I think been a very good presentation. It's really helped, certainly my understanding. Hopefully it's helped everybody's understanding of this. And thank you, Chris, in particular, for your enthusiasm for the subject.
Thank you. Enjoy your chocolate ice cream.